I'm Karen and I'm here with Kelly, and we are here to answer your grief questions. Remember to subscribe to our channel. We release videos every Wednesday and Saturday. And if you're subscribed, then you'll just have them automatically sent to you and you'll never miss one. And we're doing all kinds of topics on lots of things that we hope will be of interest to you. This one, I think, especially Kelly, is one that we were just saying beforehand. We both in groups last night have heard about this. So the question is, how do I deal with family estrangement following a loss?
Yeah, it's really a difficult topic, to be completely honest, and happens way more than I think probably most people think. And I've heard it's happening as soon as the day the person dies. Some family members will go into the house and clean it out or take things, or they go to the lawyer right away and not tell everybody. And then it causes this big ripple in the family and shift, and families can really fall apart sometimes
Yeah.
after the death. And sometimes, especially if it's like the matriarch of the family, right? Then afterwards, families don't have that person to kind of bring them together, and families fall apart. They stop seeing each other, they stop talking to each other. It's really very sad
Yeah.
when all of this happens. And it's another reason why it's so important just to have some things in place, before you die, regardless of how old you are, because hopefully that can eliminate some of those stresses and keep things a little more cohesive among family members. But that's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
And when money's involved, that can be really tricky and difficult to navigate. And even just belongings, like who wants what, right? And going in, and I've heard this, they go right in and take stuff that they want, and
Yeah.
maybe it was, labeled for somebody else, and they still take it, and it's really sad. And also there can be resentment. Maybe you took care of mom and your siblings weren't there, and now mom dies, and well, now you feel resentment towards all of your siblings because they weren't there. And then I also see not even just that, but even how different family members grieve, right?
Mm.
One may be grieving really hard and having a really hard time, and another sibling may be like, oh, whatever, and over it in their mind, right? And then those two siblings, their relationship, is negatively impacted because they aren't grieving together.
Yeah.
And so I wish that there was some magic wand that I could wave and say, oh, it'll be better, and here's some tips. But I think it's about understanding that this is totally normal. And unfortunately, it is normal. And it's about what can you do? What boundaries do you need to set for yourself? And, what ways can you communicate with your family members? Is it things that maybe you can send an email rather than having to talk on the phone because it may be too triggering for you? Just finding out ways to communicate better and express your concerns. And maybe you have to take on roles that you didn't want to take on if you really want to make sure to keep that family together. And if unfortunately, if that's not possible, it is a secondary loss. It
Yeah.
is something that we also have to grieve. And we also have to mourn the fact that maybe these relationships are going to look very different than they were before the death.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a shift in family dynamics regardless, but sometimes they really shift for the worse, and you were mentioning about somebody being a caregiver and feeling resentful toward the rest of the family. I've also heard of a lot of situations where the person who is the caregiver may be accused by other family members of not doing things right, or that they hastened something, or that they should have done something differently. There's a lot of that, and it can be siblings that are feeling the estrangement. There can be a person who loses a spouse and then feels estranged from their in-laws, and that can be for a
Absolutely.
lot of different reasons. I mean, it's about the heightened emotions that happen during the time, the very important links that a person plays within the role of a family, and then the way all of that can just change basically overnight, and nobody's prepared for it. That's so hard. I think one thing that I talk to people about with this is a couple of things. One, especially in the case of siblings, someone will be talking about how their sister or their brother, is behaving. And I'll often say, well, what were they like when you guys were younger, when you were growing up? And a lot of times the answer is like, well, he's kind of always been this way. And it's like, okay. And I know that sounds strange, but I think there's like a comfort in people just continuing on with their roles. But it's just like this loss just turns the volume up on everything. So if this person always felt like absent and selfish, they're going to feel way more absent and selfish. Or if they feel like, they've always been kind of the busybody, it's going to seem even more so. So oddly, I think it can be comforting to recognize that, because then you can also realize, like, I've been dealing with my brother my whole life.
Mhm.
Like, I actually do know how to handle some of this. Like, it feels very different now, but there are things that maybe I can do, or that I know how to do, or that I know maybe a little time can help with, you know? And that's the other thing that I say to people. It's like, I think in our line of work, people would assume that my motto would be that, like, time is promised to no one. You've got to right all of your wrongs now. Everything has to be, because, anything could happen. And I'm sort of like, well, let's assume that a little time may help. There is some fractured families that will not find their way back to each other, but sometimes that's because there were things that were already in place prior to the loss.
Absolutely.
But if there was a pretty decent, half decent relationship, I still think there is an opportunity. Could be a year from now. I mean, but I still think there is maybe some possibility that when everybody's had a little bit of time to process and a little bit of time to work through their own personal grief, that they can find their way back to each other. And as you said, it's just a matter of, like, am I going to be the one to do it? Am I going to be the one reaching out? Like, that's the choice that I think people have to make. And some people don't want to have to do that, which is understandable.
Yeah, I agree. I think time is definitely something sometimes being able to, because in the beginning everybody is so raw.
Yeah.
Everybody grieves so differently, and relationships are different, right? So they have their own, maybe their unresolved issues that they have to work through. And sometimes once you've kind of gotten through that rawness, maybe you can come back and communicate in a different way, and maybe try to get things back to somewhat to the way they were before. Maybe
Yeah.
not exactly, but, to be able to
Yeah.
have a somewhat of a relationship.
Yeah, I think it's also a time to really recognize that our family is not always the place where we're going to find our number one support.
Absolutely.
That's a big
Yep.
disappointment. We kind of think, like, well, I've got my family here. We should be able to, be supporting one another. But I will often say that family is the place where you're probably going to find the least support, at least initially, because they're all going through it too. And they're the ones being affected by, the finances and the caregiving and all of that. Whereas your best friend, or, other people in your life, they're not as close to it. So they could potentially be a better support. So I think this is also a time where we have to kind of widen that circle of where else we can get support from, and recognize that, yeah, it may be sad and disappointing that our family wasn't what we expected them to be, but there may be other people that can help me through this time until we can, hopefully again find our way back to each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, yeah. So Kelly, if you had to say just a couple of, like, points of what you think, are some of the biggest challenges and ways of coping with family estrangement after loss, what would they be?
I think understanding that it is normal, it happens to more people than you probably believe, and making sure that you're paying attention to your feelings and taking care of yourself. And maybe it is choosing to communicate in a different way, and maybe it is looking for other outside supports. And maybe it is just giving everybody a little bit of time and understanding that everybody grieves differently, and the rawness of grief can be really challenging and difficult. And maybe everybody just needs some time, and you can regroup at a later time to process and hopefully maybe resolve some of the differences. But I think it's just also about doing what you need to do. So if you need to set boundaries with certain family members, that's what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you
Thank
to
you.
everybody. We'll see you again.